Trade tensions have impacted global equities and commodity markets as the US and China exhibit no signs of really easing their escalating trade war. But how are Africa's relations with its global counterparts? Joining us now is UK Minister of State for Trade Policy, who is Greg Hands. Minister, thanks so much for your time. I call you Minister, yes?
You call me Greg, Minister, whatever you like.
The protocol in South Africa is to call ministers by ministers. But Minister, thanks for your time once again. Yeah, Africa, I must say that we're feeling sort of quite in the cold right now. A lot of rhetoric happening globally in the more developed countries, increased talk about protectionism. This President Donald Trump, giving us extra countries, not Nambia, for instance, to say the few. But just from a UK minister point of view, how does the UK see Africa?
Well, the UK, first of all, is a strong and passionate advocate for free trade. And actually, as we leave the European Union and take back our own seat at the World Trade Organization, I think you'll see the UK coming back into the space of being a strong, passionate advocate of free trade and the rules-based international system. Africa is incredibly important for us. The prospects in Africa, the actual trade at the moment is good. For example, with South Africa, there's a £8.8 billion trade relationship, up 9% year on year. And the potential in Africa as more and more consumers come into the market, production rises in Africa, huge potential for the UK. That is why I'm here today.
For sure. Let's just talk briefly about your divorce with your European partners there. Where we're reading, it seems like it's quite a messy process. So within this turbulence, what does this mean for short-term relations with Africa and South Africa specifically?
Well, I don't think it should be seen as being a messy process. We've actually done quite a lot of the process. The first phase of the negotiation is over. We've agreed an implementation period which will take the current arrangements up to December 2020, so it shouldn't be seen as being a messy process. But clearly the challenge for us is how the UK keeps its good trade relationship with the European Union, whilst at the same time the opportunity of developing our trading relations further with, for example, Africa will be enormously important. We're about to appoint Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner to cover the whole of the African continent, a really senior person. We're increasing our presence on the ground as well, making sure we've got the financial support, UK export finance, big support for UK exporters and those looking African importers getting the finance that they need to be able to get UK products.
Right, so you mentioned some stats there that trade between the UK and South Africa increasing there last year in what was a really difficult year for, I think, the both of us. I just would like to understand maybe some of the concerns that UK companies have with doing business here in South Africa. Just so we can understand how to better improve those trade relations.
Well, I think a lot of UK companies have obviously been in South Africa for a long time. And a lot of UK companies have been elsewhere in Africa for a long time. Sometimes the environment can be challenging. UK companies raise with me some of the challenges that they see, but they also see great opportunities. And that's the thing about something like trade, is where there's challenge, there's also opportunities. And I think we need to be seeing those opportunities, which I think are very considerable in Africa as we go forward.
For sure, and we will touch on those opportunities, but just for our understanding, what are some of those challenges specifically?
Well, I think there's some challenges around regulatory environment, there's some challenges around investment, there's often challenges around corruption or perceptions of corruption. Those can be things that put people off investing and trading with Africa. Part of my job is to, if you like, evangelize for the possibilities of trade with Africa, as to the benefits that it'll bring. Getting in here now is really important for a growing continent with that big growing consumer base. And of course, the support that the UK government can provide through our Department for International Trade, through UK Export Finance, through all of our different agencies, we are here to help.
Talking about tapping into that growing consumer base that is on the African continent, a lot of debates continue about whether South Africa is still the gateway into the rest of the continent. I mean, whether it's Mauritius. How does the UK see it?
Well, I don't think we've got any specific view on where is the gateway. South Africa is incredibly important. The UK is easily the largest investor in South Africa. About 45% of the stock of foreign direct investment in South Africa comes from the UK. But equally, we see other countries as being important in that picture as well. Nigeria, Kenya, etc. There's some really big trading partners of the UK, which we need to make sure that we help facilitate.
Mm-hmm. Areas of opportunity. You did highlight the growing consumer base, but perhaps any other sectors that right now are really taking the UK's interest at heart?
Well, I think financial services and access to financial markets. London is the world's leading financial centre. Making sure that African companies and African sovereign borrowers have access to that market. Making sure that we get UK investment coming out of London. Investing in African companies, that might be through our own CDC or it might be through private equity placements and so on, making sure that that financial relationship is there. I think it's good opportunities for UK technology firms. Fantastic. I mean, Africa is right at the cutting edge of technology in terms of young consumer base, looking to get access to technology. It's very exciting for UK companies to be able to access that.
Interesting you mentioned financial services, because right now we've got two major financial services players in the form of Old Mutual and Barclays Africa, which will now be called ABSA, which are sort of breaking away from their London parents.
Well, that's really a question for those companies, how they organise themselves. But I think all of them are seeing the opportunities for growth in Africa. How they do their specific corporate organisation really is a question better put to them. We are clear that we support UK companies being here. We actually increase our support for outward direct investment from the UK into Africa over the last year.
I would really be interested in your take on the current administration's drive to not only grow the economy, but to grow it inclusively. Different views on how this inclusive growth is achieved via the various empowerment structures. What's your take on Black Economic Empowerment, or BEE as it's colloquially known?
Well, it's in terms of what I think should happen, don't forget South Africa, I think, is even today the most unequal country in the world. And it's a loss of that economic potential by having more people in poverty than needs to be the case. I think that is the most important thing, making sure that there are people from our perspective who grow their prosperity, enter the labour market, get a secure job. That is important for the UK, although many of these questions are really questions to be put to the South African government.
Well, obviously for the UK as well, you're on the receiving end of some of these policies.
Well, I had a very productive meeting with Rob Davies today, the South African Trade Minister. We talked about some of the measures that he's trying to put in place to make sure that black empowerment continues and is extended. We are broadly supportive of that as the UK. We think is important and actually raises prosperity, and it's in the UK national interest for South Africa and the whole of Africa to raise its prosperity. It's important for our security, it's important for our trade, and it's actually important for moral reasons as well.
I'd like to, as we wrap up, just get your take on governance, particularly in the private sector, because this was a big theme last year, because there was a lot of South African companies found to have been doing a bad kind of business or practicing bad business ethics when it came to UK companies, your Bell Pottinger, Hogan Lovells, KPMG, and all of that comes to mind. What's the UK stance on improving governance such that we don't have a narrative like that again in South Africa and in the UK, where you've got big companies implicated in very negative narratives like capturing of the state?
Well, we've got very tough regulation in the UK of what UK companies do abroad through things like the Bribery Act. We also provide a lot of assistance to developing countries to improve their capacity to be able to administer their business sectors through overseas development assistance to make sure that countries have got the capacity to be able to police their business sectors well. That's also an important part of the UK's offer, to make sure that business thrives. It's in everybody's interest for business to be clean and seen to be doing well, because it's, after all, it's businesses that employ people, provide the jobs and help grow the prosperity.